Tonight we have the amazing opportunity to listen to Professor Copeland spin stories with us. Tomorrow night she will be giving the Norman Lewis Miller Lecture in Public Understanding, entitled Disturbing Aesthetics of Race, and that is at 7:30 in the Fort Howard Theater. So we encourage everybody to attend that. It's sure to be insightful and inspiring. Tonight is more informal. As Beth mentioned, it's going to be a question and answer conversational format. Professor Copeland will reflect on her own vocational story, and she'll tell us about some of the stories that most inspire her and her work. She'll help us think about whose stories we would do well to listen to in order to do theology in a compelling way today and to create just and inclusive communities. But before we get to our conversation, I'd like to introduce her. Dr. M. Shawn Copeland is Professor of Systematic Theology at Boston College. Prior to returning to Boston College, where she earned her Ph.D. in Systematic Theology, she taught theology here at St. Norbert College. Whoop, whoop! And also at Yale Divinity School and Marquette, and a bit at Xavier in New Orleans. Yep. Professor Copeland is widely recognized as one of the most important influences in North America in drawing attention to issues related to the religious, cultural, and social experience of African American Catholics. She's written more than 125 articles, reviews, and book chapters on such topics as theological anthropology, suffering, freedom, gender, and race. Copeland is the principal editor of Uncommon Faithfulness, The Black Catholic Experience, author of The Subversive Power of Love, The Vision of Henriette Delille, okay, and in Flesh and Freedom, Body, Race, and Being, which some of us are reading in feminist theology right now. She's a former convener of the Black Catholic Theological Symposium and a former president of the Catholic Theological Society of America, which is the principal association of Roman Catholic theologians in North America. She lectures widely in both academic venues and parish settings, and we are blessed by her presence with us tonight. Please help me give a warm welcome to Professor Copeland. So to start, we're hoping you would share something with us about your own vocational story. Are there some key moments that have shaped you as a woman of faith and also the theological work that you do?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me here. And it's a delight to be back in De Pere, where Saruji's is not very far. When I lived here, I'm forgetting, you come over the bridge, Wisconsin. You come over the bridge and you go left. And Broadway, but then you're just farther on down. Maybe it is Broadway. Riverside.
It is Wisconsin Street.
So I used to live on that street across from the Abbey, and there was a small Saruji's there, and they owned a house that they rented out, and I lived on the top floor, and the librarian lived on the first floor. And it was hard not to stop at Saruji's every day. Vocational stories, how people seem to hear their call or their invitation to living and working are always challenging, both for the person, I think, telling and for some of us listening, insofar as we're stimulated to think about our own stories and where we are in our own lives. I guess one good place to begin would be grade 12, which sounds a little bit strange, but not really. One summer when I was 12 years old, I was on my way to the 7th grade. So I was not quite 12. I was encouraged by my mother to go to summer camp. And I really didn't want to go to summer camp that summer. So I wanted to go to summer school. So I went to our high school in Detroit, which was Cass Technical High School, which was really a wonderful school. And I took 2 courses. I took a course in world history, and I took a course in French, because of course Detroit is near the Canadian border, and of course nobody in Windsor is speaking French, but you just have this kind of imagination when you're 12 that somebody there is speaking French. So I thought this would be a good thing to do. So I did that. And the thing that hit me, or that was challenging for me during that summer, was studying the history of the Second World War. This was a modern world history course. And what I met in a very strange and frightening and disturbing way was the experience of the attempt to exterminate the Jewish people during the Second World War. And this was a very odd thing, I think, for a 12-year-old. To think that people just wanted to kill you. And I remember thinking, what is that all about? And of course, the course tries to explain this to you. But it bothered me, and I remember one day I was at home making lunch or doing something in our kitchen, and an insight sort of formulated for me. And it was related to something that my grandmother used to say to me very frequently, and that was, everyone can't like you. I'm an only child. I have no siblings. And I guess outside your family, everyone doesn't tolerate all of your quirks, and we all know that that's true. But what happened is that I thought suddenly, what happens if people don't like you and they have power over you? Then they can kill you. And it was very unsettling to me. My response to that was to think that being an attorney, being a lawyer would be a great thing, because you could help people. But I also could recognize that we change laws we don't like. And once we change them, we can change them again. So there seemed to be no permanency there. And I can't say that I had a profound thought, but I had an idea about religion. And in my Catholic school, there was our teacher talked a lot about theology. And she had a friend who was another sister who was studying theology in Rome. And I thought to myself, oh, I think I'll be a theologian. This would be one way to try to work with people's minds and hearts. So if I could find a place where that became real for me, that would be the place. That theology has a service to render in helping us really learn what it means, I would put it this way now, to love one another, to live in solidarity with one another.
Now I'm curious how you ended up at Boston College to study. And also, can you say something about how you think your social location has shaped the way you do theology?
Getting to Boston College was a long story. I was speaking, not really. Today, I had a chance to speak with students in the Multicultural Center. And someone asked me about how I got to be where I was and what was that all about. And someone else had asked, Bridget had asked, not this Bridget, the other Bridget, had asked, what was it like here being an African American person in Green Bay in the 80s, because this would be 1984. And so we talked a little bit about that. And I talked about the college, and I talked about how warm people at the college were to me. And I said, I think that some of that is accounted for by the fact, at the time, I happened to be in a religious community. I was a Roman Catholic nun. And people the Norbert team sort of took me in, were very kind. There were people here who were wonderful, senior faculty. There were maybe, I don't know the size of the faculty now, but at the time when I came, it was maybe 100, 110 people. And so 10 of us all came at once. And sort of injecting 10% of your faculty increases, it sort of, you feel it. And we were all sort of energetic and young. Dr. Marcy Paul was a part of that class. Dr. David Duquette was a part of that class. I guess he's gone. Dr. Abel was a part of that sort of cohort of people who came. But the Norbert teams were great to me, and they just took me in, and so it was really a wonderful experience for me here. And I'll say this little story about Xavier Calavecchio in love and in homage, because he was the person who hired me. He taught me when I was here how to smoke cigars and drink scotch. This is why I paid attention to the t-shirt down here in front with one scotch, one, yes, exactly, one beer, okay. But I was coming, of course, from Boston College. But how I got there, I worked for a national organization of Black Catholic nuns for a while as the executive director. This would have been in the early 70s. And there was a point where you really recognized I had to pick up my theological career here, because even though I minored in theology in college because our college didn't have a major, I went on and I thought, well, this will start coming. So I did a lot of reading, sort of autodidact, that sort of thing. And then I went to work for a group called Theology in the Americas, which is worth remembering and worth speaking about at this moment. Theology in the Americas was both a process and an organization. During the Allende coup in Santiago, Chile, the overthrow of Allende's government, the Marymount Fathers, who were great missionaries, managed to get the chancellor of the diocese, Sergio Torres, who was a priest, obviously, out of Chile, and sort of rescued him because there were people being killed in the state there, and brought him to New York. And one of the things that he began to do was to help to introduce liberation theology to North American Christians. One of the things that he did was to begin to connect with other people who were doing theology in the U.S. already. And black theology, which we really don't know, certainly in our Catholic world, we're a bit isolated from this, because we actually think that there are no black Catholics. But James Cone, who is not Catholic, had been writing theology before we encountered Gutierrez. So black theology really predates liberation theology. And I worked with a wonderful guy who was an ordained Baptist minister and a lawyer who changed his name from Donald Brooks to Muhammad Kenyatta. And he and I organized the first national consultation on black theology with Theology in the Americas. The other person who worked there, who was a tremendous force, was Sister Virginia Babea, who was a Filipina Miriam sister. And these two people, Torres and Babea, really, in a really single-handed way, brought groups of theologians who were certainly writing and talking at conferences, but brought feminist theologians, professional white male theologians, Latino theologians, indigenous theologians, across church lines, denominational and church lines, together for the first time to really begin to think about a collective future for the country in which we live. And it was really it was a tremendously exciting experience. And for me, the next thing to do was to go and be a professional theologian. So off I went to Boston College. You know, all the stars aligned properly, and I was able to do that. And it's from there that I came here.
This year, the Black Catholic Theological Symposium that I mentioned in the intro will celebrate its 40th anniversary. So could you tell us a bit about that group, its history and your involvement, and also its work today?
The Black Catholic Theological Symposium is a professional association of not just theologians, although theology is in the title of the group, but also of Black Catholic scholars who are interested in thinking together and in a critical way about how church and culture intersect around our experience. And I don't just mean the 30 or so people who belong, but I mean in terms of the larger Black life world or the larger African American experience. That group is also international, since there are a number of African scholars teaching and researching and writing from the United States in a variety of schools at Notre Dame, Duquesne University, Boston College, Fordham University. So we meet once a year to exchange papers and think about the world in which we're living. That group really was the seedbed of the Institute for Black Catholic Studies. So from this group meeting for the very first time in 1978 came the Institute for Black Catholic Studies as a way to say, after a number of priests and a number of religious women had invaded upon the church to, i.e. the hierarchy, to do something about pastoral formation for people who worked in urban areas, and there was very little being done. There was some work done at Notre Dame Catholic Committee on Urban Ministry with Jack Egan, who's a wonderful priest out of the Archdiocese of Chicago. But there was very little else, and so the symposium undertook to organize and frame a program of serious theological study that would provide master's degrees for people. It's a kind of interdisciplinary degree, Black Pastoral Studies, which is not unheard of, since Black church studies are an essential part of many seminaries and theological schools. So one of the elements that we talked about this afternoon in our conversation in the Multicultural Center was a listening session. And a number of students came to speak with theologians and scholars about their experience. And so as a kind of built-in moment during the symposium, during our time together, either we're listening to people in the parish and really listening, trying to figure out what are the concerns that people have, and how could you begin to address them in your research and in your writing? How could you begin to connect with them? What kinds of programs could you support or identify that would be important? So part of the symposium is just that. It's not only professional, but it tries to have some strategic ideas about what one could do in the future.
You have written about enduring racism in the United States, and in response to that, the importance of Black and womanist theology, as well as the necessity of anti-racist work by white theologians and other theologians of color. So I wonder if you could reflect on that a bit here.
I think one of the, well, for me personally as a theologian, my own personal theology. Every theologian has a personal theology. Every artist has his or her sort of favorite artist, the person that you really connect with as an artist. I suspect every writer, I know every writer has a writer who's the writer's writer. My theology really is the theology of a mystical body of Christ. And I understand and I know the Catholic Church has a way of officially speaking about that. But for me, the mystical body of Christ are all God's people. And if that's true, then the challenge to be in solidarity with one another in very concrete ways has to be very real. So it means then you have to do what you have to do to help people have flourishing lives. And that means different things for different people. So my tasks might be different than your tasks on the basis of your social vocation and my own. And those tasks are complementary in the best sense of the word, because we have, as an ideal, something, a whole, a W-H-O-L-E, that we're aiming for. I mean, you could talk about it as the common human good. That's one way of talking about it. That's hard Catholic social teaching. You can talk about it really as, again, as humane and human living. So there is a way that theology, first of all, has never been acultural. All theology has a context. We like to think of theology as acontextual. We think, oh, there's some theology that's not. That's the real theology. But then there's those people who do, okay, Latino theology, or they do black theology, or womanist theology, or womanist theology, or they... But then there's theology. No, all theology is contextual. My best example for this, and I'm sure Professor Ebert can correct me if it's not kosher or good, is this. And I use the word kosher on purpose because Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century writes a letter for a ruler on how one should go about governing the Jews. It would be absolutely impossible, scandalous, and sinful to write anything like that today. It's simply not possible. Because he's writing in a cultural context, both trying to ameliorate forms of anti-Semitism, of which the church was, unfortunately, a great purveyor, but also trying in some ways to say something constructive and positive about the life and needs of Jews. So that's a 13th century contextual response. Not everything he wrote was contextual, but he had a context, or some of what he wrote. So all theology has a context. There are some things that you can't, we don't know how to write about. What do we do about extraterrestrial life? I'm not a person who does that, but there are some colleagues of ours who are very interested in whether or not there's extraterrestrial life, and how do we treat that life? How do we relate to it? How do we engage it? So all theology has a context. That's just my point. The debates and arguments that we've engaged in across the centuries in theology have come from the context, the problems, the questions that people ask, the issues that concern them. Theology is not just reflecting on itself. It really has an outward dimension, and a dimension for assisting us in our living. It's true that religion can get along without theology, but theology can't get along without religion, and it can't get along without human beings. So I think that's one dimension for me. That's my personal theology, which tries to say that all human life is interconnected. You can move through all sorts of people who've said this. Whether you want to talk about Cardinal Burnham's seamless garment, whether you want to talk about Martin Luther King Jr. saying we are all caught up together in one great web of life, in his World House chapter in Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community. This is really, it's a belief of the great religions, and it's a belief of religions that we don't identify as the great world religions. Thinking of, when we do that, we're thinking of Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, Judaism. But the indigenous religions of many people around the globe are also oriented in that same way. that all life is interconnected. So that would be a key thing for me. To talk about womanist theology is to say that basically Black theology got started in the late 1960s, 1968. 1969 is James Cone's first book, Black Theology and Black Power. He writes this book after Martin Luther King Jr. is murdered on April 4th, 1968. Cone takes that summer of 1968 to write this book, which galvanizes ministers and others who have been working very diligently in the civil rights movement. They're coming to this point in 1969, 68, 69, and these are Protestant ministers. And they're saying something very important to us all about life. But in their work, their focus is such that it replicates, in fact, the patriarchal dimensions of mainstream theology. What someone like the late Lenny Russell of Yale Divinity School would call male stream theology. And what happens is that Black women, students of some of these very professors, start to begin to critique their work, their professors' work, by saying you've left out half of the Black community. You've forgotten all about women, all about the concerns of women, the questions of women. And in doing so, they decided to use this term from Alice Walker in her wonderful collection of essays, Inheriting Her Mother's Gardens. And what Walker writes there is a definition of the word womanish, W-O-M-A-N-I-S-H. It's an old folk saying, and I suspect that no mothers use this word much anymore, certainly not in our urban and urbane Black community. But if you were a little person and you were sort of, doing what you should not be doing, trying to be an adult, your mother would say to you, stop being so womanish. Stop trying to act like you're a grown-up woman when you're not. And what Walker does is take this and she sort of parses it into a 3 or 4 part definition. And these women, Katie Geneva Cannon, Jacqueline Grant, who were all both at Union, Dolores Williams, they take this up and they begin to use this as a way to refer to their concerns. One of the stresses of women's theology is that it's concerned about everybody. Certainly it places at the center of its discourse and its reflection the experiences of African American or Black people. But the demand in one of her definitions, she does this in a kind of dialogue. She says, someone says, Mama, who are all our brothers and sisters? Who are those people? And the response is, well, they may be brown or red or yellow or white, but they're all your brothers and sisters. So there's this inherent concern to be concerned for everybody. So that's womanist theology, sort of in a nutshell. Is that okay?
You might be getting to this in your lecture tomorrow, but maybe could you say a little bit more about how racism looks in the U.S. today, beyond a kind of common sense understanding of racism?
The common sense or overt racism is really very easy to identify. I mean, if you think of Charlottesville, people walking through Charlottesville, Virginia, I won't pick on the tiki torches because it's not their fault. But they're walking there and they're saying things that are completely hideous. The Jews will not replace us. They're saying things which are hateful and spiteful and vicious. We can identify that as racism, and we don't have much of a problem doing that. And we say to ourselves, well, that's not us. I don't do that. What we don't do is reflect on our unexamined assumptions, our habits. We don't reflect on the way in which the institutions that we cherish are structured to keep some people out and to usher others in. We don't pay attention to how race functions in that way. We get one or two black or brown or red or yellow people in the room, and we think we're all okay. But we're not thinking about what happens to the way we run things. So racism is also something, a kind of, it's an acquired, some people would say pathological response to other human beings. But it isn't a learned behavior. Nobody's born racist. We learn how to behave like this. We learn how. We learn from family, some people. We learn from society, surely. We learn from our peers. We all struggle to belong. Everybody wants to belong. And it's hard if you were, if you remember high school, you want to belong, Every now and then I have a snapback to being, my sixth grade experience was Phyllis Tanner used to take my lunch money in my little grade school, And she wasn't white. I went to a little black grade school. So we can be vicious to each other. We can be bullied. We all want to belong. But sometimes we push some people out for some reason. Sometimes we think we can't identify the reason, but in fact we really can. We just thought about it. So racism, I think, is changing the way in which we organize ourselves, the way in which we demonstrate our interests, the way in which we respond to the behaviors of others. I think everybody has their opinions about what's happening to us as a nation, but we are becoming much, I don't like the word tolerant. This is a thing I've learned from one of my professors. Once you start to tolerate, you tolerate anything and everything. To think back to the experience of the attempt to exterminate the Jewish people, there's this famous quote, and I won't get it. As soon as I start, somebody will know what it is. Pastor Niemöller, who says, when they came for the communists, I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist. When they came for the trade unionists, I didn't speak up because I wasn't a trade unionist. And then he goes all down the line of all sorts of different professions and people when they came for the whoever. And then he says, when they came for me, there was no one left to speak. That reinforces for me, the unity of the human race. There's just one race, the human race. And the melanin, the amount of melanin in your skin, in the end, means nothing. But we've constructed meanings for these things. And we've taught people these meanings. That's the problem. We've taught people these meanings. And people have internalized the meanings. That's the other dimension. So from a theological point of view, racism is a sin. It's idolatry. It's preferring some people over God's creation. Sort of setting up somebody really as God and somebody else, all the other people aren't. It's global. It's intersectional. It works everywhere. It's a way to divide. It's a way to divide. And it is, I think, heresy and idolatry. From a theological point of view. It's sinful. It's not just the one bad individual. It's in our systems, and that's the thing. That's the thing. Is that sort of, yeah. That's the thing. It's what we don't examine. It's what we are caught up in, and we don't think about. We don't ever ask who's missing, who's not here, and where are they, and why aren't they here? It's sort of the old story of somebody rescuing bodies that washed down from the river or mountain above, but nobody asks why are the bodies coming anyway. We just keep moving them and burying them and being gracious and honoring them, but then we don't ask what is making that happen. So it's our challenge, I think, to make it happen. I think this is really a critical time. I'm deeply moved by two movements, really, Black Lives Matters, and I'm moved by the young people from Marjorie Stone Douglas High School in Parkville, Florida. I think these two movements are trying to say something to us as a nation about how we are or are not And I think it's important to listen. It's very important to listen. Not to dismiss, but to really listen to what people are saying. What's underneath the anger. There's a lot of fear among those young high school people. This doesn't exempt us living in happy college land. It doesn't. It doesn't exempt us at Boston College. Some of the first school shootings were at universities. So we have to listen more to one another, be more attentive, and more intentional about our relationships. Kinder, gentler people with one another in some way. Not in a wishy-washy or simply politically correct way. It's another word I can't bear. I mean, what would you say to someone? Or what would you say? Whatever happened to respect? Those are all very basic tenets that we insist are part and parcel of our so-called Christian identity as a nation. I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing it. So there are a lot of us working very hard to try to encourage you all here as the future to figure out what we will do and what we will become. Because we're not going to be here in 25 or 40 years. And we can't just sort of use up our country. I mean, you can't just use it up. I mean, it's a place to make money and then we just do what we want. That's not a country, that's a bank. We're not a bank. We're not a bank, we're a system of relationships. That's what it really is about. How we relate and connect with one another.
That's great. We've been partnering with StoryCorps this year at the Cassandra Voss Center, and one of the things that the founder of StoryCorps says, Dave Isay, is listening is an act of love. And we've been really thinking about that this year. And if what's unfortunate is there's so much division and polarization and name calling. The church isn't exempt to that in our country, and so to think about moving across those divisions or divides is a challenge. What do you think are the biggest obstacles to that kind of dialogue or to solidarity? Do you think it is fear, or what are your thoughts on that?
I think we live in a zero-sum game. If you get something, I won't. It's as if human rights are not large enough for all human beings. To me, that's really where it is. But if you think about 1965, okay, so 75, 85, 95, 2005, 2015. So black people in the South have had the right to vote for 50 years. So we're a new democracy. We're a new democracy. So if you ask why don't these people get, it's in the Constitution, so why do we have to have a law? It's not because of them, it's because of us. Do we think that if they get to vote, we won't? Or do we think that they're voting, they're beginning to reflect and dialogue and discuss and be intelligent voters will change things that have been very easy for us? Well, yes, they probably will. But that's part and parcel of a democratically free society. That's where the point about listening and debate are so important, because, in fact, I mean, this is really. I'm thinking a lot about Martin Luther King Jr. lately for a couple of other reasons, but the time now is really urgent about trying to figure out how to have conversations with one another and how to learn to listen. The other piece I think of is that no one is willing to think that they might be wrong. none of us are right 100% of the time. About 100% of all things. None of us. So if I splash out one group, I really am, in fact, preventing all of us from benefiting from the ideas that come from that group. If I say, well, only the people in the first row can, have the good ideas and nobody else does, maybe they don't have the good ideas. Or maybe they do, but maybe there are other ideas that could grow out of those ideas if there was dialogue. So there's fear, there's a zero-sum game, there's a level of resentment, a level of resentment in the country that's really quite terrible.
I appreciate what you're saying about an unwillingness to show vulnerability or to be vulnerable. And I think the Christian theological tradition has a lot to teach us about what vulnerability looks like and what it can bring, to empty ourselves or to have some humility before God and others. And I think that willingness to be vulnerable is a big part of it. I do want to allow other people to have an opportunity to ask some questions, although I have 1,000 more I'd like to ask. So is there anyone who is interested in asking a question? We'll maybe bring the mic over to you. Stephanie.
Thank you for sharing this evening. I was just wondering if you had some ideas to share on how, as people of faith, we can encourage the church to be a place of restoration and refuge as we grapple with these very real social challenges when perhaps at times leaders are unable or unwilling to hear. Where's the hope in the challenge?
Sorry. Well, one thing I think is really true is that we're disappointed in leaders who are not willing to stand up for what is obviously right. It doesn't take, you don't need a Ph.D. or an MA or a BA to know that name-calling and bullying of people, especially people who are vulnerable, is immoral in some ways. But it's very sad that this isn't happening. So then it's our responsibility. It's easy to take, it's easy to criticize leaders, but we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing? And so I would just say, you can't, I said this today, and I really believe this, you don't believe in the church, you believe in God. And if you do that, then you have a demand of conscience to respond, whether the official church is responding or not. And in fact, we are the church. We are the church. There are some people in charge of it, but in fact, we are the church. So I think, what you have to do, what I do, you figure out where you can get good guidance. That seems to really be honest guidance and true guidance. And once that really happens, and that's not something that you just do lightly, but then you have to act. And however it is that your situation in life, your social location allows you to act. Because that's where your integrity will be.
You spoke a little bit earlier about your experiences in middle school. How do you think future educators or educators right now can better empower their students?
First of all, there are lots of smart people in school. And that's one of the things that is exciting about these young high school students from Parkland, Florida, is that they're so smart. And if you don't know smart people in high school and in college, Dr. Paul and I were saying this afternoon, that then you start to think, well, somebody else is talking for them. No, you're smart. You're smart. You're publishing your newspapers, you're editing things, you're making films, you're smart. How do we support that? It's by really challenging you to do the very best work that you can, and being honest in criticism, but also being honest in support. The other thing is that we should really love you well, in the sense of real respect, but also real demand. And I think that's what you can do for anybody that you're teaching, I think, quite honestly. And then do the very best that you can, you know, in terms of communication, in terms of preparation, engagement, facilitating people's own leadership, not falling into banking education. You know, I mean, we're all doing that, you know, but I mean, really not doing it. Because we all resort to the lecture because we're afraid. And so it's easier to talk for 50 minutes, you know, on your lecture than it is to have someone ask a question that you can't answer and have to say that I can't answer it. But then you say, let's see if we can find out the answer together. And that becomes the next step. That's the real challenge, I think, about education. It's to lead out. That's the old etymology, educare, to lead out. So where are you leading people out from? You know, all of the Socratic sort of orientation is all about leading out of the cave. You know? And once you're out, you don't want to go back, even though you feel the challenge, the pull of wanting to get other people out, and they don't want to get out. That's part of our situation, I think, in terms of the church and in terms of this issue of gun control. Not that I want to talk about that, but I think these young people are trying to lead us out of something that we don't want to get out of, because we don't really understand what we're doing. We don't really understand. We really don't even understand our Constitution, which is really sad, because that's all that really holds us together here. Is that okay? Is that okay?
When you talked about a zero-sum game, it made me think of movements of all lives matter or the idea of reverse racism. So how do we have open dialogue when the very entity of liberating movements of Black Lives Matter creates the discourse that it is not liberating? So it's very meaningless. You know, it has an existential crisis of just a movement being alive.
I didn't get the last part. An existential crisis about a movement being.
So the existential crisis of the Black Lives Movement being a movement of liberation when certain folks feel it's more defining, it's limiting, where all lives matter. It's, you know, the emphasis on the intersectional relationships.
Well, all lives do matter. All lives do matter. So why does someone have to say Black Lives Matter? That's the real question. If all lives mattered, no one would ever say Black Lives Matter. So this may be a point of disagreement, but the very statement Black Lives Matter comes out of an existential crisis in which my life doesn't matter. That's what these people are feeling in response to Trayvon Martin, in response to Michael Brown, in response to Eric Garner, in response to Philando Castile, in response to Sandra Bland, in response to Andy Lopez, Tamir Rice, all of these names. I mean, these aren't just names; they're people's lives that are gone, and they're not gone because we were following due process of law. Whether or not we like our legal system, we have one, and so no single person in that system is arresting officer, judge, jury, no single person. And once that happens to people, once someone usurps all those powers, then there's a real problem. And there is a real problem in the criminal justice system. Black people, I know, are not the only people in the United States who suffer from our hyper-capitalist world, society. We're not the only people. Indigenous people suffer tremendously. Poor white people suffer tremendously in Appalachia and in rural areas. So it's not Latino. There are all sorts of people we're all suffering from our behavior. We're doing this to ourselves. But the concern about this, from the point of view of some black people, would be this. As long as black people are quiet, we're happy. But once they stand up and say, don't do this to me, we suddenly feel as if, there's a problem here. Why are you doing that? And I think this is the point about listening. Why would people say that? Why would people have to say that in a free society? Why would someone deface, if you hung a Black Lives Matter sign on your door, why would somebody come by and deface it? The thing that's real for us in this country is that this is not my quote, this is Saadia Hartman, who teaches at Columbia University. We too are living in the time of slavery. We are living in the time that slavery created. No one in here was alive in the 19th century. But we're responsible for going forward with what we have. And we may know some things better than people did in the 19th century, maybe not as well. But we certainly have a moral responsibility so that no one has to ever protest to us that my life matters. It should matter to all of us. If you want to talk about it later, I'm happy to talk with you.
So I'm a history education major, and I know that there are many other history majors here right now. And I truly believe, as do many of my fellows, that these issues, we can trace them back to their historical roots and really see how they've evolved from their history, and that looking at that history can, in a new way, can try and help solve these issues. That being said, is there a way that we should try and teach history or look at history with our students in a way to try and help or solve or figure out these issues? What should we look at when looking back at the sources and the causes of these issues to really help understand them?
I'm not a historian, so you all have the historical methods and you have the ways in which historians operate and which historians work. And you know what problems and questions and issues historians have overlooked for long periods of time because everyone assumed that there are no sources. But there are sources, and you have to figure out how to do that. The other thing, I think, is that as a nation, as a national culture, we're very ahistorical. We're the practical, pragmatic people of the future. We can barely get to the present and we're so busy getting to the future. And I think that's an issue for us, to slow down and pay attention. I mean, that's the other side, or the other dimension of people saying my life matters. It doesn't mean that your life doesn't matter or anybody else's. It just means that my life does. And my saying that my life matters in a real way in our society, why are you saying that, should be the question. The other thing I think about history is the systems that we have come from flawed people. You know. We don't have to judge Jefferson by our standards. There were very intelligent people alive who were Jefferson's peers who disagreed with him vehemently. But he chose to persist in what he knew was incorrect. He has an uneasy conscience. This is the man who tells us we have the wolf by the ears and we can't let him go. We can't let it go. And why? This is about fear. This is one of our great things. We're so afraid of each other. We're so afraid. And with no real reason, unless you have an uneasy conscience. Unless you have an uneasy conscience. So I think really having people read, a few different accounts of the same events becomes important. You get comparative ways of people reading the same event. I'm sure you know that. I'm not telling you anything new. I think taking up different perspectives and realizing that they are perspectives. They're not totalities, they're perspectives. They're perspectives. I mean, you can't write a real critical history of the United States all by yourself. I mean, think about it. Think about it. Think about Americanization, what that meant to people coming from Ireland, or people coming from Poland, or Lithuania, or Germany, or people coming from, just think about the 19th century immigration. There are as many perspectives on immigration as there are communities of people who immigrate. If you saw, did anyone here see Brooklyn? Right here, many years ago? As soon as the woman gets the suitcase in her hand, I'm weeping. Because I know what's coming. We live here. We know what we do with each other. The Irish had a horrible time in Boston. Plenty of signs up. No Irish need apply. If you, the Golden Door is probably, it's an old movie. But it too is about Italian immigration, and it too shows what we do to people. It's a powerful movie. It's a powerful movie. It's not about it's not a Godfather-ish movie. It's a real movie of a family trying to survive and yet not wanting to lose their dignity. So much so that the mother of the family is willing to go back to nothing rather than stay here and be insulted. So we've all had a horrible time here. But we're all at a certain place in which here's the thing that we've learned. We've learned, in fact, how to take on certain characteristics and operate with them. How to keep some people below the line and some people above. We've got a few above and keep the rest below. I mean, history can help us with that. That's where, it's visualization, it's travel, all those things for history give us a context for the nation. Why did Italians leave? Why did the Irish leave? They just didn't leave because they wanted to. You've got a potato famine, and where did that come from? I mean, there's a whole set of constructed relationships that account for our movements in many instances. Not all, in many.
Last question. So it's easy to get like really hopeless in these kind of these topics, and just in this day and age. So I'm curious about things that you do that motivate you, or that keep you driven, or that give you kind of like moments of joy in our day and age. And kind of who are you reading? What are you doing? Things that just kind of inspire you to keep going and thinking of things of freedom and liberation that you just kind of books.
Well, I think it's a gift and a grace. It's a gift and a grace to be around young people. So I love my undergraduates because you'll just ask anything. You won't hold back. Graduate students are always very sculpted and crafted in their questions. But you just ask anything. And that's what makes it hard, but also exciting, to be a teacher. And so that's important. I mean, how do I know what music to listen to? How do I know what movies to see? And so if you start telling me movies that I should and shouldn't see, I can tell you what black and white movies that you should be seeing. Movies in black and white. Have you seen Cary Grant ever? I want to ask you. Have you seen Grace Kelly? I mean, there are, come on, Betty Davis. I mean, please. These are, if you love, there's something, you have to find things that we connect with, and we can find those things. Because we educate each other. We educate each other. I think the other thing is, hope is not optimism. Hope requires a real commitment for something that is really difficult to achieve, but the struggle to achieve it changes you. That's the point of hope. It changes you. And so yes, making a commitment to hope and to act. The other thing is to pray. I don't just pray because I'm a theologian, I pray because I'm a Christian. And I couldn't get along without it. Couldn't get along without it. And you go to the movies, back to the movies. You listen to music. Music is always hopeful. We try to read a lot of different things. Novels.
Maybe time for one more question. I saw two hands go up, so let's see.
So my question kind of goes hand in hand with Jaime's, but I was kind of wondering as well, I wrote it down so I don't forget. How do you deal with the difficulty of kind of navigating different identities in different contexts that society doesn't always value fairly, in my opinion? Because to me that's sort of like a commitment in and of itself, but one that not everybody has the privilege of shaping. So how do you kind of cope with that and endure?
Not everyone has the privilege of.
I think what I mean when I say that is not everybody has to, yes, we're all privileged in different intersections of our identity, but obviously some people are more or less. But how do you deal with the difficulty of navigating that in different contexts?
You just keep on trying, quite honestly. I don't have a... I guess I'm not systematic about myself in this sense, if you're asking about myself. But you try to engage people where they are, because in a way, this is, I guess that's true. I try to engage people where they are. And, I don't personally have, any real personal taxes. I'm not sort of crusading against racism because somebody hurt me. That's not the point. I'm crusading against it because, we really are, we're going to kill each other if we're not we don't stop and think about what we're doing. I think, I'm saying this because I'm reading Martin Luther King Jr.'s Where Do We Go From Here again. And that's part of the last part of that book. Either we're going to learn how to coexist, or we're going to, violently co-annihilate one another. We're on the verge, she says, of chaos and community. So I think the point is, I want community. It doesn't have to be at the same level with every single human being on the face of the planet. But we would prefer a peaceable planet. The other thing that King says, and I think this is really true, this is the tough thing. You can't hate other people. So what if they do things to you? You can't hate other people. It just doesn't work. Because what happens is, it spoils your spirit. Alice Walker has a great novel. She's really a short story writer, but she has a great novel, The Third Life of Shawn Copeland. Okay, and I like it not because it's got my name, but it's a great novel. It's a great novel. There's a man who is who's horrible, and he's not good with his wife. He's not good with his son, and his last chance, his third life, is his granddaughter. And the granddaughter in this story, this part of the novel, is very angry at some sort of racist thing that's happening in town. And he's trying to say to her, look, you have to just kind of get through this. And she's saying back, well, they behave like that, we should behave too. And he's saying, no, you can't do that. You can't hate. She says, well, why not? And he says, because it spoils your spirit. Pretty soon, he says, you start hating everybody. Then you start hating me. You start hating your father. There's a sense in which that sort of thing spreads, metastasizes. And so you don't want that to happen to yourself. You're not doing it out of selfishness, but you're doing it because you want to honor your own human spirit in your own soul. Which is not to say that you don't get angry. Women should be angry more often.
I just have a question. Just like in this day, like in this era when everyone has the freedom to choose like what they can be exposed to and what to listen to, it is really hard to bring these conversations to the majority of the countries, for instance. So, what kind of action can we take? Because you can tell it on this campus, not everyone's going to choose to come to this talk or tomorrow's lecture, for instance. So, what kind of action can we as college students take to make it a more generalization, idea, just bring the buzz out there, start a conversation, make it a bigger thing so that more people will talk about the topic.
That's a really good question, like all the others. In this way, that what specifically are you asking can we do? And there are a lot of different things, I think. I'm just drawing, and maybe you already do this too, so don't, stop me in this way, that at Boston College, we are always trying to get our students to have these conversations. And it doesn't always happen, it doesn't always work. But what is true is that there are several programs that run in the dorms. There's something called FACES, and people, just commit to coming once a week to a conversation. And it might not be 500 or 700 people. It might just be, 50 people in 2 dorms. Maybe in little groups of 7 or 10, and just sit around and talk and share. Have a little cup of coffee or something, I don't know. And talk, and then you invite somebody in, then you invite a faculty member in after your third meeting just to chat with you a little bit about it. And then you just keep doing it. Or one of the other things that people are doing is just trying to set up their own reading groups together. So you take a couple things for the semester and read them and talk about them. I mean, these are low commitments, but could have high impact value. Because, I mean, this is a great time in your life when you get to read. I mean, gosh, come on. Even if you're on work study, you still are getting to read books, and you're still getting to enjoy reading books, and you can select them, and you can figure out books that are really going to push you. And it's okay to throw the book across the room once or twice, but then you pick it up and you keep reading. And you keep talking. I mean, that's the only thing. I mean, and you're throwing it across the room, you're not throwing it at anybody. And that's an okay reaction because it's honest. It's really honest. And you can be skeptical of the book. But you commit to getting through it. That's the thing. So those are all different ways in which, those are 2 different ways, they're not all, those are 2 different ways, I mean, that come to my mind right off the top, But I think they can be practical for you because they don't have to be, I mean, I don't know if you're taking 5 courses a semester or 4, I don't know. But you're working, 4, oh gosh. You slack or something? I mean, I think really, that's a lot of work. And we're all demanding, we want our paper in on time, We don't have to wait a month to get it back, but we want it on time. So there's a way, though, that you can maximize your time together in that way. And just getting to know people. And that's really important at your stage in life. It really is. It really is. I really hope you, I hope you all talk to each other, You don't have to agree, but if you keep talking, that's the thing. You keep talking. And if I can just hear the other person's point of view, what disturbs them about that action, or that, whatever it is, then maybe I can get down deeper to a way to explain it or a way to understand it myself, for myself. Thanks a lot, very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, that was great. And conversation to be continued tomorrow night, 7:30, Fort Howard Theater. So thanks so much for your time. That was great.